When Queen Camilla leaned in to speak to Princess Charlotte, she had no idea Catherine was watching. What happened next would change everything. It had begun like any other spring weekend on the royal calendar, timed to the minute, packed with family duties and framed by the familiar backdrop of Windsor. Yet something about this particular gathering unsettled Princess Catherine. Over the years, she had learned to trust her instincts, especially when it came to her children. That morning, Charlotte had been unusually quiet, not sulky or upset, just oddly withdrawn, as if she wanted to fade into the background. And that wasn't like her at all. The family was gathered at Windsor. It's a castle for a private luncheon honoring one of the Queen Consort's recent charitable patronages. Such events were common enough. But they brought together multiple generations under one roof, Camilla's circle. Catherine's family, and a mix of extended royals who didn't always blend easily. Catherine usually endured these gatherings with grace, but she remained vigilant. William could slip comfortably into his role, but Catherine always kept her eyes open. That afternoon, Charlotte was asked to join the younger cousins in a side salon. By royal standards, it was casual, though still formal enough that the children were expected to behave, make polite conversation, and enjoy their tea while the adults mingled in the main hall. Catherine had helped Charlotte to her seat, kissed her on the forehead, and left with one last glance. Nothing seemed amiss, at least. Not yet. But things changed later. About 45 minutes into the event, Catherine, mid-conversation with a senior courtier, spotted Charlotte through an open doorway across the corridor. The little girl wasn't crying, but her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked wounded not physically, but emotionally. Catherine excused herself immediately and followed. She found Charlotte alone at the far end of the hallway, near a service door. Hands clasped in front of her, eyes fixed on the floor. "What happened?" Catherine asked softly. "Nothing, Mommy," Charlotte whispered after a pause. Catherine crouched down to meet her eye. "Sweetheart, I know when something's wrong." Finally, Charlotte spoke. "Granny Camilla said I was showing off. She told me not to speak unless I was spoken to." Catherine blinked. "When did she say that?" "When I told Louis the answer to a question," Charlotte explained. "We were just playing a guessing game." But she got annoyed. Catherine pulled Charlotte into a hug. She stayed calm outwardly, but inside, everything shifted. She had always worked to maintain peace with Camilla, even when it felt like a forced dance. Camilla had her own opinions about hierarchy and behavior, and though she often covered them with a smile, her tone sometimes betrayed her. Catherine had believed those little jabs would never extend to her children. She was wrong. Later that day, Catherine walked with Charlotte during the family's stroll through the gardens. Camilla moved ahead with Charles, chatting easily, as though the morning had been free of tension. Catherine observed her carefully. It wasn't only about the remark anymore. It was that Charlotte had felt compelled to retreat and hide. After the garden walk, everyone regrouped indoors. Catherine kept a quiet watch over the room. At the refreshment table, Charlotte reached for a second scone. Camilla turned, smiled faintly, and said, "Perhaps one is enough, darling." "We don't want to appear greedy." There it was again. Catherine recognized it now. This wasn't an isolated incident. These were patterned, small, cutting comments that, on their own, might seem harmless, but directed at the same child over and over, they added up. Catherine didn't react outwardly. She wasn't the type to cause a scene, but her silence had always been intentional. She had just reached the point where she would no longer remain quiet. William hadn't noticed any of it. He had been occupied with Charles and senior aides, going over schedules. But later, once they were back at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine intended to raise it this time as a mother who could no longer ignore what she'd seen. Still, before that conversation could take place, another moment unfolded. Catherine had never expected royal life to be easy. She knew the burden of duty, the unspoken rules, the endless effort to maintain appearances while juggling real life behind the scenes. But there was one thing she would never tolerate: anyone making her children feel small, least of all someone. Within the family, the moment arrived just after tea had been cleared. The adults moved into a sitting room off the main gallery, following an old tradition from the Queen's time. The children were allowed to join briefly before being taken upstairs. Charlotte walked in with George and Louis, her expression carefully neutral, and sat by the fireplace. Idly flipping through a book, Camilla entered soon after. Glass of water in hand, laughing softly with a long-time aide. Her mood seemed bright. She offered the children a quick smile before turning back to the adults. But minutes later, the laughter around her faded. George and Louis wandered over to their grandfather, standing beside Charles, while Charlotte stayed in her armchair. After a pause, she asked politely, "May I play the piano for a bit?" "The piano?" Camilla replied, glancing over her shoulder. "Yes," Charlotte said. Just quietly. Camilla sipped from her glass, then looked at her directly. "Darling, that's not necessary. Let the grown-ups enjoy some peace. Why don't you sit still like a proper young lady?" It wasn't loud or cruel, but it was deliberate. The words carried a sharpness that adults so often underestimate, cutting in a way that left Charlotte's cheeks warm with embarrassment. She closed her book quietly and folded her hands in her lap. Catherine, standing nearby in conversation with Lady Lansdowne, heard it. Her eyes flicked to Charlotte, then to Camilla. She said nothing. Not yet, but her gaze lingered longer than usual, and Camilla noticed. Their eyes met for the briefest moment before Camilla turned away. The room soon resumed its chatter, though the air had shifted. That evening at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine tucked Charlotte into bed herself. The house was hushed. William was finishing a call with his private secretary. George was already asleep. Sitting at the edge of her daughter's bed, Catherine asked softly, "Did you feel upset today?" Charlotte hesitated. "A little, but I'm okay." Catherine shook her head gently. "You don't have to pretend." Charlotte's voice lowered. "Granny Camilla doesn't like when I talk too much." The honesty landed with a sting, simple, direct, without confusion. Catherine kissed her forehead, then left the room. Passing the study, she found William looking up from his desk. "Is she all right?" he asked. "She's trying to be," Catherine replied. "What happened?" She told him everything, not with anger, but with clarity. She repeated Charlotte's words, then described what she had witnessed, the cold remarks, the dismissive tone, the repeated efforts to shrink their daughter's presence. William listened silently, jaw tightening as she finished. "This isn't something we let slide," Catherine said. "I agree," he answered. "But we need to handle it carefully. The next morning?" Catherine quietly excused Charlotte from her scheduled engagement. Children's charity garden project organized by Camilla. She claimed a minor cold, but the truth was simpler. She wasn't ready to put her daughter back in that environment. Word soon reached Camilla, who raised a brow when informed. "Probably too delicate for a little mud," she remarked under her breath. Catherine heard of it soon enough. The royal households always talked more than they admitted. The matter might have ended there until the following weekend. Charles had invited William and Catherine to Highgrove for a small family dinner. The intention was light. Reconnect, discuss tours, enjoy a quiet evening. But when Catherine arrived with Charlotte just to let her greet her grandfather before bed, the evening shifted. Charlotte entered the lounge, smiled politely, and said, "Good evening, Granny." Camilla, seated by the fire, barely glanced up. "Are you sure you're not too tired to be here?" she asked. The jab was thinly veiled, and everyone in the room heard it. Catherine's eyes locked onto Camilla. This time she would not wait. The polite smile she had worn vanished, replaced with steel. "Why don't you say goodnight to Grandpa and head upstairs with Anna?" she told Charlotte gently. The child glanced up, uncertain, but her mother's nod guided her. Charlotte hugged Charles, then left with the nanny. As the door closed, silence thickened. Camilla swirled her wine. "Well," she muttered, "she's very sensitive, isn't she?" William froze. Charles shifted uncomfortably. Catherine stepped forward, her words measured. "No, she isn't too sensitive. She's a child, and she deserves kindness." Camilla lifted a brow. "I didn't mean it that way. I was just surprised she's still awake." Hardly worth fussing over. Catherine's expression didn't waver. "It isn't just tonight. It's been happening for weeks. I've heard what's been said, and so has she." The atmosphere cooled. Charles began. "Darling, perhaps we should know," Catherine interrupted, still calm, but firm. "If it were just one comment, we'd move on. But it's not. It's a pattern, and I will not stand by while my daughter is made to feel less than." Camilla turned to William. expecting him to step in. He didn't. His silence was louder than words. Catherine continued. I've tried to keep peace, because that's what's expected. I've overlooked moments that didn't feel right. But this is different. This involves Charlotte. I won't let anyone, no matter who they are, undermine her confidence. Camilla set her glass down. You're reading too much into this? You always take things so seriously. Children are resilient. Children remember how they're spoken to, Catherine replied, especially by those meant to protect them. There was no storm, no raised voice. Just the unmistakable power of a mother drawing a line. William finally spoke. We're asking for basic respect. Charlotte hasn't done anything wrong. She's simply being herself. That should never be a problem. Camilla looked to Charles, but he remained silent. He knew better than to press. A boundary had been drawn, and Catherine had made it clear it would not be crossed. After a tense pause, Catherine excused herself and left the room. William followed shortly after. Upstairs, Catherine returned to Charlotte's bedside. She didn't ask questions this time, only reached for her daughter's hand. You did nothing wrong, she assured her softly. You were polite. You were kind. That's all I'll ever ask of you. Charlotte's eyes lifted toward her mother. I tried to be, she whispered. Catherine shook her head gently. You don't need to try to be perfect. You just have to be you. Meanwhile, downstairs, Charles attempted to steer the atmosphere back to calm by changing the subject. Camilla, however, remained quiet. She offered no apology, though she also chose not to defend herself again. That night at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine and William spoke privately in their room. Catherine's voice remained steady, though the long day had clearly worn her down. She doesn't have to like me, Catherine said. But she will treat Charlotte with respect. That is non-negotiable, William agreed. She will. Because we won't allow this to continue. In the days that followed, things seemed civil, yet subtly altered. The next occasion was Charlotte's school recital at Lambrook, and Catherine decided only immediate family should attend. Camilla was excluded. Publicly, the palace described it as a scheduling conflict, but insiders knew the real reason. Outwardly, nothing seemed different. Press photos showed smiling faces in unity. Behind palace doors, though, a line had been drawn. Camilla still appeared at major functions, but her distance from Charlotte was unmistakable. No more offhand remarks, no lingering looks at least not within Catherine's reach. She had established a boundary, even in a family that had lived by centuries of hierarchy and deference. Boundaries came with consequences, yet peace was not absolute. Camilla had heeded the warning, but she hadn't forgotten it. And when summer brought the family to Balmoral, everything inched closer to the edge. For Charles, Balmoral had always been a sanctuary, a place free from the relentless press, where he could think, walk, and breathe. It had been the late Queen's beloved retreat. Tradition kept the family gathering there every year. But this summer, the atmosphere carried a different weight. Catherine agreed to come, but with limits clearly in place. She and William brought George, Charlotte, and Louis, as expected. But Catherine had made her stance clear. She would never again leave Charlotte alone, not even for minutes, not with Camilla nearby. Family members arrived gradually. Charles welcomed them first with cheerful warmth, delighted to have his grandchildren close. Camilla arrived later, her entourage and carefully chosen wardrobe in tow. Since the High Rove incident, she had kept her distance, speaking to Catherine only in brief formal exchanges at public events. On the surface, everyone pretended nothing had happened. The opening days at Balmoral unfolded smoothly: walks through the hills, horseback rides, dinners echoing with laughter. Slowly, Charlotte's light began to return. Catherine watched her daughter relax chatty at the breakfast table, racing across fields with her brothers, even spending an afternoon baking scones with the kitchen staff. But the calm didn't last. One afternoon, Catherine sat in the drawing room with Lady Sarah Chateau and a handful of aides. William had gone fishing with Charles, while the children played in the garden under staff supervision. For the first time since their arrival, Catherine allowed herself to look away for more than 5 minutes. Then came the quiet words of a household aide. I believe Princess Charlotte is in the sunroom with Her Majesty. Catherine's body tensed. She didn't move immediately, but the sentence echoed like a warning bell. Rising without explanation, she strode toward the sunroom. Voices reached her before she entered Camilla's and Charlotte's. "We don't always need to speak over others," Camilla was saying. "It's important to listen. Sometimes your mommy forgets that too." Charlotte stayed silent. Catherine stepped inside. Camilla glanced up in surprise. "There you are," Catherine said evenly. "I was looking for you, darling." Charlotte rose and went straight to her mother's side. "I was just having a word," Camilla remarked lightly, though with an edge. "I heard," Catherine replied. Camilla arched a brow. She was only, but Catherine cut in, her voice calm and resolute. "She was only being a child. She doesn't need to be corrected every time she opens her mouth." Camilla folded her arms. "I've raised children. I know when a girl is growing too quickly for her own good." Catherine held her gaze. "She's growing just fine, and she'll do so without being made to feel like she's a problem." There was no shouting, only clarity, a tone that left no room for debate. "I'd like a bit more kindness shown to her," Catherine added. "That isn't too much to ask." Camilla said nothing, her silence deliberate. But Catherine no longer cared. For years, she had shouldered the duty of preserving the institution. Now her priority was simpler, stronger, protecting her daughter. Once they left the room, Catherine knelt beside Charlotte in the hallway. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. Charlotte nodded, though her eyes shimmered with tears. "You never need to be afraid of speaking up," Catherine assured her. By week's end, the change was visible to all. Camilla kept her distance. At meals, she sat farther from the children. She made no comments about their behavior, their tone, or their clothes. In the royal world, such subtleties carried enormous weight. Catherine had not caused a scene, but her presence had drawn an unmistakable line. Even Charles, who had hoped time might soften things, understood better now. He adored both women, but he knew that when Catherine set her ground, it was with reason and with finality. The summer concluded, as always, with photographs of the family gathered on the castle steps, smiling and waving to well-wishers. Yet behind those smiles, something had shifted. Camilla had lost something she hadn't realized she was losing: Catherine's tolerance for appearances. That patience was gone. Outwardly, the family projected unity. Behind closed doors, one mother had ensured her daughter would never again feel small. And now the question lingers: what would you have done in Catherine's place? Did Camilla cross the line? Or was it simply a clash of generations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more, and click the video now, playing on your screen.